You've seen the image 1,000 times. A hunched ape, then a stooped caveman, then a spear-carrying brute with a club, then, finally, you. Upright, civilized, evolved. It's one of the most recognized pictures in the world, and almost all of it is wrong. Not slightly off, not missing a few details. Wrong in ways that change everything about how you understand yourself. Here's what the textbooks never told you. For most of recorded history, scientists assumed that early humans were violent, brutish, and barely holding it together. They lived short, miserable lives. They fought constantly. They had no language worth speaking of, no real social bonds, no art, no planning, no future. Just survival. Just instinct. That was the story, and it shaped how you see yourself, as something that clawed its way out of the dark. But the evidence doesn't support that story anymore. In 2017, a paleoanthropologist named Berger led a team into a cave system in South Africa called Rising Star. What they found there stopped the field cold. The fossils of Homo naledi, a small-brained ancient human relative, were buried deep inside a pitch-black chamber that required navigating through passages barely wide enough for a human body. No predators could have dragged them there. No flood could have carried them. The only explanation that fits the evidence is deliberate burial. An ancient human species, with a brain 1/3 the size of yours, was burying its dead, possibly with ritual intention. Hundreds of thousands of years before, scientists thought that was even possible. That shakes something loose, doesn't it? Because if burial requires grief, or memory, or the concept of death, then something that looks nothing like you was already thinking thoughts that feel deeply human. And it doesn't stop there. In 2023, researchers studying a Neanderthal skeleton found in Shanidar Cave in Iraq discovered something that had been debated for decades. The bones showed severe injuries, a crushed arm, a healed eye socket, damage that would have left the individual unable to hunt, unable to fend for themselves. And yet they survived, for years, which means someone else kept them alive. Someone fed them. Someone protected them when they had nothing left to offer in return. Neanderthals, the species you were probably taught were grunting near humans who lost to the smarter model, were practicing something that looks a lot like compassion. You weren't taught that version. But here's where it gets stranger. The violence narrative, the idea that prehistoric humans were locked in constant tribal warfare, was built largely on a misreading of the archaeological record. Anthropologist Ferguson spent decades analyzing the skeletal evidence for prehistoric violence. What he found was that mass conflict, the kind that looks like warfare, appears very late in the human story, closely tied to the rise of agriculture, resource hoarding, and settled territory. Before that, the evidence is thin, sporadic, easily explained by individual conflict, not organized war. The caveman with the club is mostly a story you inherited from people who wanted to explain why humans are the way they are now, not who humans actually were. Then, so what were they? The picture that's emerging from modern research is almost the opposite of what you grew up with. Early humans were highly social. They shared food across bloodlines. They innovated. They decorated their bodies. They made music. A 60,000-year-old vulture bone flute found in Slovenia suggests that Neanderthals were creating melody long before modern humans arrived in Europe. A melody. Not a grunt. Not a signal. A song. Think about what that means. To make music, your brain needs to model time. It needs to anticipate. It needs to find patterns and then play with them. Music is one of the most cognitively complex things a brain can do, and something you were taught to think of as barely human was doing it in the dark. paleoarchaeologist Francesco has spent years studying early symbolic behavior. The marks, the pigments, the shells with holes drilled through them that ancient humans wore as jewelry. His research pushes the origin of symbolic thinking back to at least 100,000 years ago, maybe further. These weren't accidents. These weren't functional objects. These were meaning. Someone, 100,000 years before you were born, looked at a shell and thought, "This represents something. This says something about who I am. That's not a brute. That's a person." And yet, the old story is sticky. It stays with you. Partly because it was taught with such confidence. Partly because it lets you believe that progress is linear, that you are the most evolved, the most advanced, the furthest point on the arrow. But evolution doesn't work like that. It isn't a ladder. It's a bush. And many of the branches that didn't survive into your present were not lesser versions of you. They were different versions. Some of them, in some ways, were more connected to the world around them than you will ever be. Here is the hardest part to sit with. The traits you think of as modern: empathy, creativity, long-term planning, abstract thought. None of them started with you. None of them started with Homo sapiens. They were already present, in fragments and full form, in species that vanished before your ancestors built their first permanent shelter. You didn't invent consciousness. You inherited a very old conversation. And the violence, the greed, the tribalism that you sometimes assume must be part of your ancient programming? Brian Ferguson's research suggests that's the newer feature. That came with property, with surplus, with borders, which means you are not the product of millions of years of war. You're the product of millions of years of care. Your ancestors survived not because they were the most aggressive. They survived because they were the most cooperative, the best at reading each other, trusting each other, building something together that no individual could build alone. That capacity is still in you. It is the oldest thing in you. So the next time you help someone without being asked, or feel something shift inside you when a stranger is hurting, or find yourself moved by a piece of music you can't explain, that isn't soft. That isn't weakness. That is 300,000 years of human history expressing itself through your body. You've seen the image 1,000 times. The ape, the caveman, the brute. Then you. But the real picture is stranger and far more beautiful than that. You're not the end of a long climb out of the dark. You're the latest voice in a conversation that started long before anyone thought to write it down.